Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Oraculos podcast, where I bring you ancient wisdom for the modern mystic. I'm your host, Mychal A. Bryan, and joining me today, all the way from California, is Dr. Greg Bogart. Greg, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Mychal. Hello.
Hey there, Greg. Greg, I'm super excited to dive into the conversation that you and I are going to be having today. But before we get there, for those of you who this is your first time joining us here on the Oraculos podcast, this is a podcast where I bring you interviews from astrologers all around the world who aren't just changing their own lives through their astrological practice, but they're also actively impacting this greater field of astrology that we all know and love. So if you want to continue to be a part of the magic and the momentum that we're building here on the Oraculos podcast, give yourself a moment, go down below, like this video, but also hit the subscription button and hit the notification bell so that you receive notifications of when I bring you these interviews each and every week. Now, Greg, how are you doing?
Great, thank you.
Awesome. Greg, I am really happy that we're finally getting this opportunity to sit down and speak about your work because, one, I love the ways in which both of our interests crossed paths, and I know that I do Iyengar yoga and that you've also been an Iyengar yoga practitioner and are an Iyengar yoga practitioner, but also we both have this love of astrology as a therapeutic tool. So before we really dive into talking about your therapeutic astrological work, I just want to give you the opportunity to tell us who you are and how did you find your way to astrology to begin with?
Thank you. Well, I started my yoga practice in my teen years, and I went off to India at age 20 to be at the Siddha Yoga Ashram. And while there, I had the chance to meet Chakrapani Ulal, the famous Vedic astrologer. And I visited his home in Bombay and had a reading that blew my mind completely. And I actually had no connection to astrology up to that point. But he actually projected the thought that I would be doing such work in the future, which I thought was pretty surprising. But sometime later, I had graduated college and I was hitchhiking around and a little bit lost under a major Neptune transit to my natal Saturn. And it was at that time that I discovered astrology out in Oregon. And several astrologers helped me. And I went and sat in the woods and looked at the sky and followed some of the planets in the sky and looked at the ephemeris. And that helped me find my place in the universe. And so from there, I ended up in Boulder in 1981, where I met a very unusual man from Venezuela named Andres Tacra, who was a sidereal astrologer, and I became his apprentice for 9 months. And he taught me a great deal, and that's when I started doing charts for people. And I remember I once wrote to Chakrapani and said, people are asking me to do their chart, but I'm not sure I know what I'm doing. Is it okay for me to try? And he says, of course, if you don't think you know what you're doing, just read the chart anyway. So anyway, you learn by doing, and that's how I did. So after several years of doing astrological readings, I discovered that I needed more background knowledge. I needed more tools as a counselor. I really needed to know because sometimes in doing a chart reading, you will touch on some sensitive issues, some tender feelings, and some intense charged energies sometimes come up. So I felt that I needed to be trained to work with that therapeutically. And so from there, I went to California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco, where I got a great training in counseling, and went on to become a marriage and family therapist. So from the beginning of that time, I was interested in how the astrological map could be part of being a therapist and how it guides the counseling process and helps us get right to the point, to the heart of the issues. And so my work unfolded from there.
I think it's really amazing how you were practicing as an astrologer and out of an internal inclination realized that you needed more training that wasn't specifically astrological, but it was training in how to hold space for people and training in how to really stand in the gap as a counselor for someone, which is something that I think a lot of astrologers feel within themselves. And we have fields like psychological astrology specifically that kind of integrates counseling models within it. But I think it's really impressive when an astrologer studies in a realm that is not specifically astrological in order to better improve their ability to serve their clients as an astrologer.
I think so. I think even knowledge of human development, developmental psychology, so beautifully dovetails with astrological cycles. And when you put those two together, the study of transit cycles and the study of phases of the lifespan, as developmental psychologists have mapped it, it's a great basis for counseling people at different turning points, at different stages of transformation.
So, Greg, what do you find is the central greatest thing that your astrological practice as a counselor and also as an astrologer has brought you? How has your own practice shifted, and what's the gem within the heart of that for you these days?
Hmm. Well, I learn something new from every session. And I've learned to trust the spontaneity of the process, that I don't have to know what everything in a chart means when I first look at it. Until I'm in dialogue with the person, we don't entirely know. But through the right dialogue, the right questions that we ask about planetary placements or transits, we evoke a rich story and we see how the natal potentials are being lived. Are they dormant? Are they fully awakening? And so I think one of the great things that I'm learning at this time is just how to go with it wherever it goes. And it's often very unexpected. So, just as a brief example, somebody recently had a chart with Saturn, Pluto, and Uranus in the fourth house. And, you kind of expect, changes in the domestic sphere, maybe change of residence. So this person had purchased a home after renting for 10 years. And that you would, it seems consonant with Jupiter and Saturn in the fourth house. But I felt like maybe there was more to it. So I thought about the themes of Saturn and Pluto in the fourth house. Had there been any recent deaths in the family? Was there any atmosphere of bereavement? Was there any recent crisis or upsurgence of old resentments, things coming up from the distant past, or the uncovering of family secrets that had been buried? And these were just general inferences I was making or suggestions about what could be manifesting. Well, there was such a rich story. Mother's second husband died, came back into her life after many years. Many old resentments surfaced about childhood, verbal abuse, and then they did a DNA test that uncovered a whole new wing of the family they didn't know about, and a whole story that had been sort of covered up in secrecy over several generations came to light. And that was totally unexpected. So those are a few things that I'm enjoying in my practice at this time, especially this idea of process-oriented astrology, that too often we think we can just nail the meaning of something with with a single statement or interpretations we've read in books, when in fact, if we meditate on the symbols with a client, dwell in it, and breathe in it for a moment, rich layers of meaning unfold, but it's learning to trust that process. That's been what I've been learning. And to not just make pronouncements based on a chart.
This concept of a process-oriented astrology, is that something that you created within yourself through your own practice, or is that something that you specifically were taught someplace?
I think it's something that I've evolved from myself. You know, when I did the book Astrology and Meditation, The Fearless Contemplation of Change, which is published by WESSEX Astrologer. That book was published, 18 years ago, I believe, 2002. I was working with this idea of meditation on the planets, that before we jump to any conclusion about the meaning of something, we need meditation. We need to go to a place of stillness and ask, why is the universe calling this forth? What is needed? What wants to happen? And that contemplative approach transforms our understanding. So typically people who have had some aspects that they've read in books are, quite difficult or complicated or dire, they discover the deep meaningfulness in it, that it's something that they're part of. It's not something foreign to them that they just endure as a sentence, from their chart. So I guess I wasn't really taught it by anyone, but I think I've learned it doing astrotherapy, where the idea is we live through the transit over a period of time. Someone going through a Saturn transit to their sun, to their moon, to their ascendant. It's not just one event that marks the meaning of the transit. So as we live through it over a period of weeks or months, the meaning gathers momentum or becomes much more self-evident as a developmental process, as a maturation. And so I think having the opportunity to work with clients over a series of sessions has been conducive to developing that process-oriented approach. But even within a single session, even within one session, not being in too big a hurry to nail down the single meaning of something, but to see every symbol as having rich, multiple meanings, just as dream images don't mean just one thing. They release wave after wave of meanings. So that's the great thing about astrology, is you're always learning something new about your chart. I've been studying my chart for 40 years, and every time I look at my transits, I learn something new.
So for those of you who aren't aware, the WESSEX Astrologer is a publishing company that is specifically dedicated to bringing out excellent textbooks within this field of astrology. You can find out more about their books and titles over at their website, which is wessexastrologer.com. Now, Greg, you had mentioned something earlier about books and people going to books as their primary source of learning. And you also juxtapose that against this larger framework of a process-based astrology in which you create this ongoing dialogue with your clients that may happen in one session, but that can happen over a series of sessions. So the question I want to ask you is, for the people whose only contact point with astrology is books, how can they find a greater sense of depth within their astrological experience when they do have the cookbooks that says that your moon square Saturn means this thing? How can those people engage in a more process-based orientation within their astrological practice?
Wonderful question, Mychal. First of all, it's really important to read books, to read all the books we can. We have so many great astrology books to learn from. But ultimately, we have to feel the planets. We have to feel what Mars in Cancer feels like. We have to resonate with that, with our own chart or with someone else's chart. Ultimately, to me, the most important tool is the ephemeris. And following planetary transits on a daily basis allows us to feel the energies, to feel what a moon square Saturn feels like, how that's different from a moon conjunct Jupiter, or when Mars is retrograde and turning direct like it is right now, to follow that over a period of weeks. Looking at the ephemeris teaches us about the sky as process and about our psychic development as process. So we see each aspect that forms as a moment in a flow of time. And so it has meaning as part of larger cycles, a larger order. So feeling that in one's own life on a constant basis, studying the ephemeris, to me, is the way to deepen that understanding. And from that, we can readily read and interpret other people's maps and help them find their way with that understanding. So we don't have to be afraid of a Pluto transit or a transit to natal Mars. I've been telling this story. It's in my recent book, Astrology's Higher Octaves. A guy's having a series of transits to Mars in his 6th house, and he knows a little astrology, and he thinks this means he's going to have a health crisis or some other thing is going to blow up in his life. So we start talking about workplace issues. He employs people. He has a dream about a guy, a seedy looking guy in a casino wearing pointy loafers with slick back hair. And he calls the guy, we talk about the dream, and he calls him the shark. And he said, this is somebody who knows how to take care of his own best interests. He could be a shrewd businessman. What it reminds him of is he needs to fire his director of marketing and sales, who is like lazy and goofing off and not doing his job. So instead of just suffering the transit to his Mars, he takes action. He's decisive. He does what he has to do regarding his employee to improve the performance of his staff. This is how I work with it. So the idea is to face everything with as much consciousness as possible, so we're not terrified of what's coming. This year has been a Saturn-Pluto conjunction, and with the added accent of Mars conjunct Saturn and Pluto in the spring when the pandemic really started to burst forth. And now this last 3 or 4 months since August, Mars retrograde squaring Saturn and Pluto. It's difficult. There is no question. These are difficult times. But when we hold it within the frame of Saturn and Pluto, enduring adversity, maturing within limitations, understanding the need for restrictions. When we take it in that sense, having structures in place to cope with emergencies, we're going to survive. Those of us, hopefully who are not terribly afflicted with this ailment and illness, we're going to get through this time. So I maybe lost the thread of your question a little bit, but the idea is following the good book, the ephemeris, on a daily basis, feeling the sky as process. That's how I've developed this process-oriented approach. The approach I use in therapeutic astrology is developmental, it's dialogical, it's process-oriented. So it's rooted in a framework of understanding stages of development and how we can evolve the expression of each planet. The planets are not dead. The planets are living energies, but we have to develop within each of those energies. We have to develop our Mercury, our cognitive focus, our communicative precision and excellence. We have to develop our Venus, our social skills, and our sense of beauty in daily life. We have to develop our Saturn, our time management, our completion of tasks, our accomplishing of things stage by stage with sustained effort. So the planets are a part of us. That's the approach I'm interested in.
I'm very happy that you brought up the constant daily meditation on the ephemeris because I teach astrology to younger, upcoming astrologers, and I find that a lot of younger astrologers don't really care that much for their ephemeris, or they feel as if it's something they can just pull up on their app or they can pull up on their phone. But I too love this ability to hold an ephemeris and flip through it and see what's going on today and see how what's going on today is a development of what happened yesterday and see how that takes us into what's going to be happening tomorrow. I think that that meditation on the ephemeris and just moving with the planets as they move is a really special thing, and it really creates a deeper awareness within yourself about the subtle and not so subtle influence of astrology on your daily life.
Absolutely. Hey, I'm all for the apps. It's amazing we have these apps. And I understand that people have less predilection to go for the printed word, the printed books these days. But if anyone who wants to be an astrologer, this is one printed book you really must have because it tells the story of the sky. And I had one astrologer ask me in an interview, why do you use an ephemeris? And I said, so I can plan my life. Because when you look at the ephemeris, you see what's coming up. So you organize yourself in such a way that you are in alignment with what's coming up. As a writer, I know that there are phases of heightened activity and productivity, and there are phases of less productivity, less focus, all tied to the cycle of Mercury. And this is all explained in basically all of my books, the Mercury cycle. But knowing that, I can plan for times when I'm likely to be more busy with writing projects. And then at times when Mercury is not as active, so to speak, I can allow myself to do other things, to not worry about writing, to not feel like I have to do it all the time. So you can plan your vacation for a favorable time. You can plan a date for a favorable time if you use the ephemeris. He said, well, how do you plan? Well, you look at the head, you look in the ephemeris, you see how the planets are moving and plan accordingly. It also allows you to go backward in time to pivotal events to understand them. I remember I was hit by a car when I was 12 years old, a pivotal event in my life. And I remember studying all the transits for that event. I learned so much. I learned so much about that from studying that event or dozens of others. So basically, as you read the story of the planets in the ephemeris, you see your own story. You wrap yourself into it, you weave yourself into the movement of the planets seamlessly. Even just following the moon's aspects to other planets on a daily basis gives you so much information about the feeling of a day, what needs to be done on that day, what's the focus of that day. So anyway, that's my sense is the ephemeris is going to remain an essential tool for the astrologer.
I couldn't agree with you more. Now, let's take a moment to talk about your book, Astrology and Meditation, The Fearless Contemplation of Change. There you have it, which was published by WESSEX Astrologer. What made you want to create a book about essentially astrology and meditation?
Yes, well, I've always approached astrology as a yoga, as a path of self integration. And I have always felt that to understand what's going on astrologically, I need to go into a place of deep stillness, deep silence, and um, unfold the meaning of things from that meditation. Now, it's been a while since I've read this book, but it has a series of meditations on the various planets. And like I said in somewhere in this book, nothing fancy, just kind of down to earth, basic astrology. The main, the planets of our solar system. There's no asteroids. There's only a few references to midpoints. But then I developed this technique of symbol amplification. And that comes out of working with dreams, where you amplify dream symbols. You ask, what does this dream character remind me of? What does this place in a dream remind me of? What does this color remind me of? What does this whole scene evoke for me? We use the same method in astrological work with symbol amplification. So I teach that method in the book of how to let the symbol reveal wave after wave of meanings. And there is a section in here on astrology as a spiritual practice, which is how I've always pursued it. Like you, Mychal, I'm a lifelong yoga practitioner. So for me, astrology is the yoga of time. It's the yoga of life cycles. And everything that is in my chart is an instruction and an invitation to transform, to change shapes during different phases of life. Honestly, I've changed shapes tremendously from where I started, and astrology has been my guide one step of the way, one step at a time.
How important do you find it, Greg, for people to have a spiritual practice alongside their astrology? Because, like you pointed out, we're both lifelong yoga practitioners, and I'm sure that your yoga practice has also done something to deepen your understanding of your astrology. But how important do you think it is for people in general to have a spiritual practice alongside the astrology that they practice?
I think everybody's spiritual practice is different. So I don't know that everybody needs to be into yoga, for example, or even formal meditation. That just happens to be great for me. But some people's spiritual practice is to be a parent, to be a chef, to work in gardens, to work in law enforcement. And so we have to discern our own nature, our own potentials in the chart and how it wants us to evolve. And that is a spiritual life, a spiritual path. It doesn't always look like sitting in silent meditation, going to retreats and ashrams. It's different for different people. So I would never say everybody has to have a similar spiritual practice. But I think if you unfold what is presented to you in your chart, that is your spiritual practice. Today, I did a chart for somebody who has Saturn in the second house opposing Jupiter, and somebody who has a lot of fifth house energy. She's a very creative person, but she needs the grounding in the world of business, in the world of money management, bookkeeping, and accounting. And that's part of her spiritual practice, is to hold together those financial structures for herself and for the business she works for. So really, whatever path you're on can be your spiritual practice. But I do think it's important to breathe. I think to be a good astrologer, having a quiet mind that is not flapping around constantly with fear is helpful. And that is cultivated through a variety of methods, including meditation. For me, that's a great way. Also, gardening, also just being in nature, being with animals. So or swimming. There's so many ways, and yet I think astrology bursts with spiritual meanings. So it is a spiritual practice. It is a spiritual teaching. Even if it's saying, yeah, just keep working, just keep saving money. That's your spiritual practice right now. But that's beautiful if you know this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Saturn and Pluto are in my second house. Yes, I've got to hold it together financially. I just have gone through Pluto crossing into my fourth house for 3 years. It took 3 years to cross the nadir. And it was this massive process of relocation. It took 3 years to get settled, but it's fantastic. And that's my spiritual practice during that time, dealing with renovations and a earthquake retrofit. That's a spiritual path for me at this time. But quieting down, having a silent moment, asking, why did the universe ask me to write my chart with Pluto in this house or Uranus in my seventh house? What's the potential of it? What is the highest potential expression of this planet or this planetary square or opposition? What does life want me to develop with this? So that's the basic approach I teach in astrology and meditation. And it's consistent with the idea that while we learn from books, the revelation of meanings in astrology is spontaneous. We suddenly light up and know, oh, this is what the universe is urging me to do. And so many times the interpretations don't come out of a book. And as you know, I write books, so I want people to read books. And I've learned so much. And yet you really take a step forward in your astrology when you articulate the meaning in your own way.
Beautifully said, Greg. Now, speaking about the books that you've written, you've also written on astrology and dreamwork. And I have downloaded past lectures that you gave at UX on this very topic of astrology and dreamwork and creating an experience of participation with that on the part of the dreamer. Can you tell us a little bit about what gave you this idea to come up with astrology and dreamwork?
Okay, so this topic is discussed in this brand new book, which is called Astrology's Higher Octaves. And that is one of the topics covered here. Now, as a therapist, I've done a lot of work with dreams. And I've written 2 fairly massive books on Jungian dream analysis. And it is one of the primary methodologies I use therapeutically to work with trauma, to work with relationship conflicts, to work with anger management, substance abuse, depression, a variety of problems. And what I started to get interested in was how the symbols of dreams reflect what's going on in the natal chart and the current transits. You can find incredible cross references or meaningful connections between planetary symbols and dream symbols. Now, this led me into looking at Jung's interests in both astrology and dreams. So separately, he investigated the value of dreams for our individuation and personal growth. And then he was also avidly studying astrology. But I don't know that he made the connection. This is what I'm trying to do, is sort of complete the bridge between astrology and depth psychology. And so I like to work with a chart and a dream together. A chart and a dream together will yield unexpected new meanings. And I've been doing this in workshops. So you may have heard a recording of a workshop at UAC where we did this. And the whole group gets involved with seeing the connections. So I do it in groups and I do it in individual sessions where we see the synchronicity, how the archetypes or the timeless patterns of transformation are active and can be anticipated with astrology, with its timing methods. We can anticipate a particular archetype is rising to prominence or importance for us at a given time. So an example in the book is of a woman who has transiting Saturn on her natal moon. Her natal moon happens to be conjunct Saturn and Uranus in the 7th house. So it's her Saturn return. Her boyfriend is pressing her to commit and to have children. So there's this pressing on the issue of the moon, the principle, the function, the role of motherhood, mothering. And she has a dream that is all filled with images that remind her of women in her family and how they coped with motherhood, stresses and tensions or challenges they faced. And by working that through, she's able to understand her own caution, her own apprehension, her fear of stepping into that next stage of life. And so all of the material in the dream directly relates to the fact that Saturn is transiting over her natal moon at that time. So the archetype of mother is, it's the developmental path, whether to accept that path or to refuse that path. But it's that lunar archetype that stands out during that transit. So basically, I am suggesting that depth psychology would benefit from using the astrological worldview because you anticipate the archetypes. You see when this principle is likely to be emerging. And I don't want to go through all the different planets right now. That's what's in the book. And then dreams can bring tremendous new understanding or insights about the meaning of a particular transit I'm having. It's like you say, oh yeah, what's the meaning of transiting Saturn on my natal moon during my Saturn return? Well, the dream just told us, your aunt had a problem with her kids and was sort of negligent, and you're afraid that you would be that kind of mother, so you're not sure. So that's how dreams and astrological symbols can inform one another. I also gave you the example of the guy who dreamed about the shark, the seedy guy in the casino, when he needed to, be aggressive and take a risk and fire somebody for the good of his business enterprise.
When I personally think about astrological dream work, because of my roots in medieval astrology and Renaissance astrology, I think of something completely different, but I'm very impressed and amazed at how you've taken the dream work that you've always done essentially in your life as a counselor and how you found a way to work out what essentially is the Greg Bogart system of astrological dream work. because I don't believe that there is a school within our astrological field that really teaches a system of dream work as clear and as codified as the one that you just described.
Well, we're just evolving psychological astrology now. I mean, really, it's only a few decades old since Rudyard birthed humanistic astrology, since Liz Green did her depth psychological books, and just a few other authors. So, yes, we're just getting going with seeing the possibilities of this fusion. I think it will be a major topic of research in the future of depth psychology, and I hope in the future of astrology as well. Most of all, it's incredibly fun. It's just doggone fun seeing these connections between dream symbols and planetary transits. You just wow, so fantastic.
Now, is this something that you think any professional consulting astrologer can pick up and easily apply to their practice? Or what sort of background do you think that person would need in order to implement this astrological dream work?
Well, the first thing is the the astrology I do, it just emanates from my own interests. So I've been into dreams since I was a kid. I have Neptune on my north node. This is just what I do. This is just how I've lived my astrology life. Someone else has a different configuration and may not gravitate towards this approach. But if you're a Neptunian person and if you work with dreams yourself, you may figure out the connections. Honestly, I'm just figuring it out myself. What are the connections? There probably are authors before me who have made references to this connection with dreams, but I just can't think of who they might be right now. So I would say if it is an organic, if you're actively doing dream work yourself, if you are interested in archetypes, mythology, the universal themes and symbols, you can begin to make those cross references between dream symbols and astrological symbols. But in terms of formal preparation, I couldn't really say, other than that I've been reading Jungian literature my whole life. So that's what I find the most useful. That's the kind of dream work I find most useful, but there are other kinds. There are people who are into psychoanalytic dream work, and Lacanian dream work is totally different than what I do, the work based on the work of Jacques Lacan. But follow your own path, follow your own intellectual interests and spiritual inclination. And those who are drawn towards psychological astrology, I think the best training is to get coursework in psychology. I've taught for 25 years in graduate and undergraduate psychology programs. To get a career going in the field, you have to kind of go through this. You have to get at least a master's degree and get a license to be viable in the field. So if people are committed enough to do that, they will gain tremendous skills and knowledge of assessment, diagnosis, treatment methods, things to look for in working with people, how to evoke emotion, how to contain a crisis. how to understand family systems, these sorts of things. It's not a walk in the park. It requires 5 or 6 years of preparation to get into that field and get established. But it does provide some financial benefit because you can get referrals from insurance companies and have a steady stream. But I'm not saying that's everybody's cup of tea at all. I happen to have the moon rather prominent in my chart. To me, the moon is the planet of counseling and therapy and providing emotional support. But there are plenty of astrologers who don't want to do all of that, which I certainly understand. And so I think people need to develop their own approach. One of my respected colleagues, she's has a background in business, and her astrology is all about business, financial growth, and that's consonant with her interests and who she is and what her chart indicates. And so that's what I'd say is you got to follow the pattern of your own birth chart.
Now, if our viewers and listeners wanted to dive into studying this a bit more closely, or if they wanted to study with you specifically, do you offer teaching or training in some of the things that you've written about, not only in your book on astrology and dreamwork, but also within the wider corpus of your writing?
Well, that's changed over different phases of time. For a long time, I taught counselor education. I trained therapists at JFK University, Institute of Integral Studies, and several other schools. But now I teach undergraduate psychology at Sonoma State University. That's my current assignment. I don't have formal astrological classes. I just work with people individually. I train astrologers. We do casework together. But I've done my share of introductory astrology classes. And so that's not really what I'm doing currently. But I feel like in my books, there's a lot of information based on workshops given over decades. And so that's one way one can learn from me, is through the writings, where I've, my first book, Astrology and Spiritual Awakening, was just based on transcripts, originally transcripts of classes. So that's like taking a basic class for me. So in short, I do some workshops through NCGR, through ISAR, through Connecticut Astrological Society, and different conferences. But mostly it's presented in writing. That's the best way you can really access it, or having an individual session with me.
And you give readings and consultations, and you see clients astrologically in that capacity, yes?
That's what I do.
Awesome. So, Greg, if our viewers and listeners wanted to receive a reading or a consultation or something to that effect with you, how could we get in contact with you?
Well, I'll just flash my business card here. Does that appear legible way, or is it backwards?
Well, it appears legibly, but you could just tell us.
Well, my phone number is 510-594-4329. My email address is gbogart7. That's Gbogart, and then the numeral 7 at sbcglobal.net. And my books are all described at my website, which is dawnmountain.com, DAWN, mountain, MOUNTAIN, dawnmountain.com. Originally, I was a self-published writer, so I launched Dawn Mountain Press in 1994 and published 5 of my books. So that's the meaning of the Dawn Mountain. And that's how
Awesome.
you can, those are three ways you can get in touch with me.
Great, Greg. So I will put down all of your contact information down below in the description box so that our viewers and listeners can plug your work because
May I briefly display my other books?
definitely, please do show us your books.
Okay. So my first book was called Astrology and Spiritual Awakening. I self-published it, sold about 3 printings, which was amazing. You know, I sold 4,500 books. That was amazing. Now it's been
Congratulations.
republished by AFA, and it's been much expanded. And this works a lot with the idea of astrological biographies, that you learn so much by studying in-depth biographies and then looking at the corresponding transits, progressions, the natal chart patterns. And I do this for quite a few people. I talk about astrology and psychosynthesis. I talk about jazz musicians. I talk about the Buddha and the Metta Sutra, principle of metta, loving kindness. There's lots of great stuff in astrology and spiritual awakening. I did a book in the 90s called Therapeutic Astrology, using the birth chart in psychotherapy and spiritual counseling. And I completely revised and transformed and expanded that book, which is now a completely different book called Planets in Therapy, Predictive Technique and the Art of Counseling. And this is a work that goes a lot into counseling process in relation to planetary transits. It has a chapter called Better Than Prozac, Astrology and Mental Health, where I argue that astrology is a potent antidepressant, that giving meaning to our lives, to what's happening, even to challenging events, helps us have courage, helps us have a positive attitude, helps us counteract depressed moods. And so I give a lot of examples with that. It has a tutorial on transits that I like quite a bit. It has demonstrations of secondary progressions and solar arc directions. It has a chapter on synastry and relationship counseling in astrology, but it also features a chapter called Rudyard's Astrology in Plain Language. And I feel like I hope a whole new generation of readers will discover the beauty and the wisdom of Dane Rudyard's writings. But I took a year of my life at my last progressed full moon. I spent a year trying to encapsulate the essence of his astrology in about 50 pages. So I'm very happy with that part of the book. And I think it's a great introduction to Rudyard. And once you get a few basic principles in your grasp, you can read any of his works. And he is, to me, the greatest philosopher in the field of astrology. And I have these 2 books on dreams, which I will just quickly flash before your viewers. Dreamwork and Self-Healing is now published by Routledge and is a treatise on Jungian dreamwork and the archetypal forms of dreams. And this book, Dreamwork in Holistic Psychotherapy of Depression, argues that dream analysis is potent and helpful for people grappling with depression. And then, again, Astrology's Higher Octaves, which is just published by IBIS. So thank you for letting me show the books, and I hope you'll enjoy reading some of those.
Most definitely, Greg. And in hearing you speak right now about the books, I am so deeply impressed. And I can't wait to get into Planets in Therapy, because before you and I had connected, it had been something that I saw on Amazon, which I'm sure we can also purchase the rest of your books on Amazon as well, yes?
Oh, yes.
So it was something that I had seen on Amazon, and I loved the painting on the front of it because I studied medieval alchemy and I recognize the painting as something that comes out of that tradition as well.
It's fabulous.
It's a beautiful, beautiful painting. And so I had seen it, but now that I hear you speaking about it, I definitely want to get my hands on that book, especially because of some of the techniques that you speak about The solar arc directions is something that I'm very passionate about because of my life as a Uranian astrologer, but also the synastry and just having all of that within the space of one book. I think it's a really good thing for someone who has already done some astrology in their lives and they're looking for a book to allow them to go deeper. So I'm definitely going to be getting my hands on a copy of Planets in Therapy.
Thank you, Mychal. My last suggestion for everybody is keep it simple. Don't get lost in too many techniques. Just bear down and learn the meaning of the transits, including the inner planet transits. And you have everything you need with just a few things, just transits and progressions and solar arcs and midpoints. It really is revealing.
It most assuredly is. Greg, I am so happy to have had this opportunity to be able to sit with you today and speak to you about your work and also to just sit in a space of celebration of your work because especially now knowing that so much of what you do are things that you have come up with through your long years of practice. I think that that's really special because you are writing about things that you aren't just thinking about, but things that you actually have practiced within your client work. So thank you so much for your contribution to all of us within this field of astrology.
Thank you for those kind words, Mychal. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. And to our listeners and viewers out there, if this is your 100th time joining us here on the Oraculos podcast, or if this is time number 1, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for continuing to come here and share in this virtual astrological space with us. I receive your comments, your feedback, your encouragement, but most importantly, I receive your love. So if you want to continue to be a part of the magic and the momentum that we're building here on the Oraculos podcast, give yourself a moment, go down below, like this video, but subscribe to the podcast and also share this interview with your other astrologically minded friends because more and more people need to know about this amazing space where we're having these amazing conversations with these astrologers from all around the world. So until next time, I'm your host, Mychal A. Bryan, leaving you in peace and love and hope. Until we meet again. Have a good one. Bye-bye. Greg Bogart.
It's okay?
It was great. It was brilliant. Thank you so much for being here and for doing that. I really appreciate having you. And yeah, I'm really in awe of your work. So thanks a million.